Welcome to Semantic Backup Exec 2012, Agent for Microsoft Exchange Server. If you're following along in the course materials, we're in Lesson 4. In this lesson, we will review Microsoft Exchange Server Basics. These are the components of Exchange, mostly so that you understand which components you need to back up and how those components relate to each other. Then we'll take a look at the Agent for Exchange fundamentals and describe how this agent works. We'll list the requirements for backing up Microsoft Exchange. Then we'll take a deeper look at Exchange 2010 and how Backup Exec 2012 supports Exchange 2010. We'll take a look at creating backup jobs for Exchange data and creating the backup definition. And then we'll take a look at restoring Exchange data. We'll describe the workflow and how to restore the individual pieces and parts in the granular recovery technology. So let's begin with Exchange Server Basics. A Microsoft Exchange Server in the picture that we have here is Exchange 2003 or Exchange 2007. Has several storage groups. Each storage group contains other pieces that is the database. The storage group is the database. Exchange also has transaction logs that when you back up Exchange, the transaction logs are automatically flushed or emptied after they've been committed to the database. The database itself contains mailboxes, admin mailboxes, and public store. In Exchange terminology, these are priv star.edb, the private database, and pub.edb, the public database. So the mailboxes and the public folders are all stored as part of each storage group. Once mail gets to be fairly large and you have a large number of email recipients, you can break up Exchange into multiple storage groups. The best practice with Backup Exec is to back it up at the highest level possible. So back it up at the storage group level and you will automatically empty out the transaction logs and back up everything related to that storage group database. We'll also take a look at Exchange 2010. This basic structure changed. Backup Exec also understands and supports Exchange 2010. When you send emails through Exchange, those emails are actually transaction logs. So the way Exchange gets its speed is much like any other database, that it is writing to the transaction log rather than to the actual database. When you back up Exchange, what you do is commit all the changes that are in the transaction logs to the database and then empty out the database. In Exchange terminology, that's known as a flush. You flush the transaction logs. Backup Exec understands that. In older versions of Exchange, that was the only way that you could clear the transaction logs, was to run a backup. Exchange is heavily tied to Active Directory. The user account in Active Directory becomes a user mailbox in Exchange, and Exchange must use the exact same globally unique identifier or GUID that Active Directory uses. So your Exchange server will always have a copy of Active Directory replicated to it from the domain controller. Microsoft's recommendations for our Exchange are that you do not run email clients on Exchange. Newer versions of Exchange will not let you install Outlook, so you can't do this anyway. They recommend that you do not browse the internet from the Exchange server. This Exchange server needs to be as isolated as possible to reduce the risks of infections from malicious software. I need to make sure that Exchange is kept up to date with the latest security updates for both the operating system and for Exchange. Make sure that there is antivirus software running. A good idea is to run it on the Exchange server and on the client machines. Email seems to be a particular target for malicious software, so you need to make sure that you have a good antivirus software to help protect. The antivirus software should be designed for messaging systems, either at the SMTP gateway or at the Exchange servers that host those mailboxes. Exchange 2010 changed the structure of how Exchange works. In Exchange 2010, you no longer have storage groups. You have what are known as database availability groups. If I only have one Exchange server, my databases will all exist on that server. If I have more than one Exchange server, I can replicate the database from one server to another. Only one copy of the database will be considered active. The other copy or copies of the database will be passive. The idea here is that if the server hosting the active database goes down, then Exchange can present the passive copy of the database to the users, and the users will never know that Exchange had a server issue. So the databases are replicated around inside this database availability group. The idea behind the group is that I set up which servers will have copies of which databases. Backup Exec always wants to back up the passive copy of a database. There's also in Exchange 2010 something known as a client access server. When I install Outlook on my users' machines, I point the Outlook client at the client access server. The client access server is responsible for routing emails to the active copy of the database and replicating existing emails to the passive copies. So the client access server knows which copy of the database is active and where the passive copies are. On the restore side, when you restore email to Exchange 2010, you always restore it to the client access server and let the client access server route the email as appropriate to the database where it needs to go. One of the advantages to this architecture is that it is very easy to grow and to scale into larger environments. You can continue to add Exchange servers and add them to database availability groups so that the email is replicated to many locations. With that in mind, if you have enough mailboxes and enough databases in enough places, backups become very easy to back up the passive copy. But failover of the Exchange servers is all managed from within Exchange, and it is very database centric as opposed to storage group that are tied to a physical server. The idea is that I'm losing that tie to a physical server, and the databases can be replicated and brought up as necessary. Backup Exec understands all of this and helps you automate backups and restores in both the classic architecture and the architecture of Exchange 2010. As far as Exchange server fundamentals, the backups are integrated so that they will automatically flush the transaction logs. Backup Exec allows you to back up the database or the information store as a whole, but using a mailbox inside of Exchange, Backup Exec will catalog everything that's in the data store or the information store or the database so that you can do granular recovery, so you can restore individual email or individual mailbox even though we have backed up the database at a very high level. In Backup Exec 2012, when you restore data, mail, it restores to a PST folder. In older versions of Backup Exec, it restored directly to Outlook. In this version, it restores to a PST that you can then attach to Outlook. So you select at the highest level possible to do your backups. So you want to select the entire information store at a storage group level or at a database level. Backup Exec generally will not let you drill down. I can restore individual databases, I can restore individual storage groups, I can restore individual emails or individual mailboxes. Exchange 2007 and Exchange 2010 also support restoring to a snapshot, so I can revert the entire Exchange environment to a snapshot that is a point in time. Exchange 2003 did not have the snapshot technology. In order to back up Exchange, the backup exec server must have a license for the agent for applications and databases that supports the agent for Exchange. I must put the agent for Windows on any Exchange server that is related to Exchange, that is potentially being backed up. So in the case of Exchange 2010, ideally you would have the agent for Windows on every server that has a copy of the database on it. That being said, I would really only need to have the agent on the machines that will be backed up, and I could have replicas of the database other places. If you want to use the backup exec data discovery feature, what I can do with that is tell backup exec to go look for all the pieces of Exchange and find all the servers where those pieces are installed. Exchange is a distributed installation. So I'm allowing backup exec to detect all of the members of the Exchange environment and any new members that come online. To do that, I must have, if I'm running Exchange 2003, on the backup exec server, I must have the Exchange System Manager utility installed. If I'm running Exchange 2007 or 2010, I must have the Exchange Management Tools installed. What is installed on the backup exec server must match the Exchange environment. So if you update the Exchange environment, you must also update the backup exec server. To support granular recovery, this is where I can restore individual mailboxes or individual items. You must have Exchange installed on Microsoft Server 2003, SP2 or later, which includes the list that you see at the bottom of this screen. If you're going to back up Exchange 2010, the backup exec server must be installed on a 64-bit version of either Server 2008 SP2 or Server 2008 R2. For the most part, we recommend that if you're backing up 64-bit systems, the backup exec server also be 64-bit. This is one of the instances in which we require the backup exec server to be 64-bit. So if you're backing up Exchange 2010, your backup exec server must also be 64-bit. On the Exchange server side, to support Exchange Server 2007, you must download the Exchange Server MAPI client and collaboration data objects package and install it on Exchange Server 2007. I must have a logon account that is a member of the administrators group and be a member of domain admins. If you're going to back up Exchange Server 2010, I must install the agent for Windows on all the servers in the database availability group. If I want to use the granular recovery technology to restore individual items, you must also install the agent for Windows on the client access server. When you purchase the agent for Exchange, so when I purchase a license key for the agent for applications and databases, it comes with one installation of the agent for Windows. So in the case of Exchange 2010, if I had multiple servers hosting databases, I would also have to purchase the agent for Windows for every server that's hosting a database, plus one more for the client access server in order to be able to do granular recoveries. To access the Exchange mailbox, Backup Exec must have access to an account that has a unique mailbox. It must be visible in the global address list. If you have questions on how to set up that account, please visit the URL that you see here for Tech 24691, and it will walk you through the requirements for this mailbox. The account that Backup Exec uses to access Exchange must also be a member of the Domain Administrators Group. It must be explicitly added to the local admin group on the Exchange server. It really should have full admin rights to Exchange. It should be a member of Exchange administrators. You see various tech notes on this slide to walk you through how to add the account to the organizational management role or the Exchange organization admin or become a full Exchange administrator. Please check these tech notes to make sure that you have the appropriate credentials. There is a support tool known as the BE support tool that you can download from backupexec.com that will allow you to check the requirements to make sure that you are meeting all of the requirements needed to properly back up and restore Exchange as a whole and the individual pieces. So the logon requirements require, when I log on, I have to provide a username that matches that unique mailbox name. It can use a unique alias, but I have to have a full computer name for that mailbox. To install the agent for Microsoft Exchange, I go to Agents for Applications and Databases. It will support Exchange, and in the Exchange server itself, in the Exchange 2010 setup, you have to make sure that Backup Exec has access to the correct roles and has a mailbox that it can use to catalog all the information inside of Exchange. For GRT, this is the granular recovery feature. Backup Exec allows you to back up the entire information store or any database in the database availability group at that very high level. So I need to mark the information store or the Exchange server at the highest level possible. Using that mailbox that has access to Exchange, as we back up Exchange, we will catalog everything in the information store, and from a single backup, back up the entire database or information store, but still allow you to restore individual mailboxes or individual email. So I need to select Exchange at the highest level possible. I must also enable GRT in the backup. If you're doing off-host of Exchange, this is where I am creating a mirror of the Exchange data. Backup Exec can back up the off-host and still do GRT, provided you have the advanced disk-based option. You can also create snapshots of Exchange. If you are backing up Exchange 2003, it did not support snapshots, so you would have to make sure that your backup did not use snapshot technology so that you could do redirected restores. If you wanted to restore directly to the same host from which it came, you could use snapshots. If you have questions, please see the tech note listed on this screen. If a snapshot job fails, so VSS is not able to take a snapshot of Exchange, there'll be a link in the Backup Exec job history that will provide you with more information. If you were doing an incremental or a differential backup and Exchange Server 2003 SP1 or later is not installed, meaning it's an unsupported version of Exchange, snapshots will always fail. Snapshot technology didn't come in until Exchange 2003 SP1. Circular logging is a method in Exchange to make sure that the transaction logs stay very small. The idea in circular logging is that you can only have a specific number of transactions in the transaction log. As a new transaction comes in, the oldest one is committed to the database. It makes Exchange run very slowly. It limits the number of transactions in the transaction logs. So a good Exchange administrator will make sure that circular logging is not enabled. If you have enabled circular logging, you can only do full backups against Exchange. You can no longer do incremental or differential backups. Backup Exec understands that. Let's take a look at how Backup Exec 2012 supports Exchange Server 2010. So Exchange Server 2010 has something called Role-Based Access Control, or RBAC, meaning that instead of managing users at a user level, it functions much more like Active Directory, that I create roles for how people need to access Exchange, and I make users members of those roles, and they inherit the rights that have been granted to the role. So several of the roles that you see on this screen also have to do with the architecture for how Exchange is installed. I have a hub transport server role. I have a client access server role and a mailbox server role. Those are the three main ones that Backup Exec must use. Usually in most environments you will only have one machine that has the client access server role, and it acts as the traffic cop. I may have several machines that are hub transport roles or mailbox server roles. When we look at backing up Exchange 2010, Backup Exec understands these different roles. A database availability group sets the limits for where the different databases can be replicated. So in the example that you see on the screen, database 1 could be replicated to any of the servers that are in this database availability group. Most of the machines in the database availability group will have the mailbox role. That's the M that you see. The H is the hub transport role. Most of them will also have that role so that it can replicate the databases around. C is the client access role. Most Exchange environments will only have one of those. Also, for many of the Backup Exec customers, the Exchange database availability group will be relatively small, maybe 2 or 3 servers. So you wouldn't have a very, very large environment for many of the installations of Backup Exec. So this component allows us to have very good scalability, but it also allows for replication and high availability of all of the Exchange information. So databases are no longer associated with storage groups. They're not tied to specific computers. The storage group functionality has all been moved into the databases, and the databases can be replicated around for high availability. Public folder databases remain the same in Exchange. So public folders are still tied to specific servers. So I cannot create database copies of public folder databases, and I cannot add public folder databases to a database availability group. That's an Exchange function. Role-based access control is how you manage Exchange 2010. The Backup Exec account that is accessing Exchange in order to back it up must be a member of the Exchange administrator's role. If you have questions on that, there are tech notes available to help you. But when you install the agent on Exchange, it should also pop a message to you that mentions that. Preferred servers is a function of Backup Exec that allows you to say, that I realize that my database is on servers 1, 2, and 3. But server 2 is the closest server to the backup exec server. So I would prefer that backup exec back up the database from server 2. So preferred server configurations are a way of telling backup exec from which Exchange servers do you want backup exec to be able to back up the database. The default behavior of backup exec for Exchange 2010 is it wants to back up the closest passive copy from a network standpoint to the backup exec server. So it is the least number of network hops to get to the closest passive copy of the database. It has been recommended that rather than setting preferred servers, you go ahead and let backup exec run and backup Exchange as it is intended to, looking for the closest passive copy for a short time to see which version of the database it will get. If it is making network hops, or if it's backing up a version of the database that you would prefer that didn't, then you can go set up preferred server configurations. Understand that preferred server configurations is still a guideline. Backup exec really wants to back up a passive copy of the database. So if you listed only one server as a preferred server, and that database exists on 2 servers, and your preferred server becomes the active copy, backup exec will go to the non-preferred server so that it can back up the passive copy of the database. It always wants to back up the passive copy if at all possible. If you only have one Exchange server, then you're only going to have an active copy. So obviously backup exec must back up that particular copy. Preferred servers is optional, and it is a best practice to let backup exec back up Exchange for some time before you configure preferred servers. If you choose to configure preferred servers, I'm going to go to the backup exec button, select configuration and settings, and then select preferred servers. Click new. It will ask you several questions, and then you can choose the preferred servers from a list of all the Exchange servers that the backup exec server sees. You can also manage these. You can set the order in which they're being accessed, and you can add or remove preferred servers. To actually back up Exchange, you need to run full backups as often as is possible, no less than once a day. It's arguable whether Exchange is a mission-critical application, but most of your users certainly feel that it is. A full backup is the fastest restore. It is the longest backup. But if you can run full backups of Exchange at least once a day and you have to recover the Exchange server, you know that it will be relatively current. You can run daily differentials, but you can also run differentials periodically through the day. So you would have something more current than once a day. You can also back up Exchange every few days. If it's a very large environment, do a full backup every few days, no less than once a week, with backups that run as incrementals or differential between each full. If you're backing up using incrementals or differentials between each full, those need to be run on a very frequent basis, preferably more than once a day. In smaller environments, once a day means that you're only going to lose 1 day's worth of data. The more often you can run a full, the better. To back up the Exchange database, you need to select the Exchange server at the highest level possible, hopefully the database availability group or the information store. You can select a single Exchange server. In the case of Exchange 2010, you probably have multiple Exchange servers, so it's best if you create a backup exec group for those Exchange servers. If I select specific Exchange databases or storage groups. Once I create a job for that, that's all that will be included in that job. If you select it at the server level or at the group level and new databases are added, Backup Exec will automatically discover and back up those new databases. So this is the Backup Exec dynamic inclusion concept, that I'm going to back the server up or the group of servers at the highest level possible, and rather than select individual databases to be backed up, I will exclude specific databases that I don't need backed up. If I still have the checkbox at the high level, then any new databases that are added will automatically be backed up in that backup job. If I want to do incremental and differential backups, you have to make sure that circular logging is turned off for that storage group, which is also a best practice for Exchange. Circular logging slows down Exchange. To add a database availability group, I'm going to go to the Backup and Restore tab, click the Add button, and select Microsoft Exchange Database Availability Group. Do I want to establish a trust? If you do not allow this trust, you will not be able to create this availability group. So you must establish the trust. This is a trust within Backup Exec. So this is a trust between the Backup Exec server and the agent that is installed on that Exchange server. Which Exchange database availability group do you wish to add? One of the best practices here is to point this at the client access server. The client access server in Exchange 2010 understands all of the servers that are involved in the database availability group and is the traffic cop. So if I point this installation at the client access server, then Backup Exec will be able to automatically discover all of the servers in the Exchange environment and thus be able to access their databases, provided the agent is on those servers. What login account has rights to Backup Exchange? This must be a logon account that meets all of the requirements that we spoke of earlier. It needs to be an Exchange administrator account. If you pointed it at the client access server and Backup Exec has discovered multiple Exchange servers, those will be listed on the screenshot you see here, and when you tell it to install, what you will be installing is the Backup Exec agent for Windows on any machine that you've selected that it found as members of that database availability group. To do restores, the agent must also be on the client access server. So it is a best practice to put the agent on there. It's not required for backups, but it is required for restores. Do I want Backup Exec to upgrade the agent from an older version or a patched version? The default for that is yes. The other option on this screen is to restart the remote machines after the upgrade has completed. For Exchange, you want to make sure that this box is not marked. If I'm pushing the agent out to several servers in a database availability group and they all reboot at the same time, you've effectively cut off your user's access to Exchange, which is probably not what you intended. So be sure that you untick the checkbox that says Restart and only restart those Exchange servers on their next maintenance cycle or in sequence rather than all at the same time. To create the backup definition for Exchange, we go to Backup and Restore, click the Backup button. Exchange backup should always be written to disk. If you want to use the granular recovery technology, Exchange backups should be written to disk. You can duplicate them to tape for longer term storage. But if you have to restore from tape, then you must restore the entire information store or the entire database to a path that you name. The default is C:\temp before it can restore the individual pieces and parts. If you do backups to tape, you cannot restore public folders. You can only restore private folders. Symantec highly recommends that all Exchange-based backups be written to disk. So let's do our backup to disk. It will show us our Exchange servers. We can edit what is selected. You want to edit this at the highest level possible, preferably the entire information store. In larger environments, you may have different storage groups, so you may have to select one storage group for this particular backup. Don't drill down any farther. And you'll notice on the screenshot here that Backup Exec limits how far you can drill down in this backup. Public folders, even in Exchange 2010, are still associated with their specific server. Now we're ready to create the schedules on which we wish this backup to run. So you'll have a full schedule, and you can create incrementals or differentials. For each schedule, you need to select Microsoft Exchange and select the Exchange options. The default will be that granular recovery is turned on, meaning that we will catalog everything within Exchange. And Backup Exec will do a consistency check against the snapshot that was created for Exchange, which is the Microsoft recommendation. By default, we will also continue even if the consistency check fails. If you're using Exchange 2007 or later, you'll notice that Backup Exec wants to back up a passive copy if that's available, and if not, then it will go to an active copy. You can also select your preferred servers here. The recommendation is to let it run for a while before you do that, but if you choose to change your preferred servers, you can click the Change button. When you click the Change button, it will show you a list of your preferred servers that you can then set one as default, and you can edit this list. You can add or remove from this list. So in your preferred servers, you can add any server that's in your environment. As far as backing up public mailbox and public folders, this is the legacy backups. This is no longer supported. This is the old-fashioned backup of backing up the information store in one pass, and then in a separate backup, backing up what used to be called brick-level backups, where you selected each mailbox. This is no longer supported in Backup Exec 12. You back up the entire database or information store at the highest level possible. The mailbox that Backup Exec has access to will catalog everything inside there and still allow you to restore individual mailboxes, but it all happens in one pass. So the two-pass legacy backups are gone. That's a good thing. To restore Exchange, you can restore the entire information store. You can restore an entire database as well as individual items. You can restore to their original location, which is the default, or you can redirect to a new location. Typically, Exchange is not real friendly with redirects, but Backup Exec will help you out with that. So the requirements and the procedures vary depending on the backup strategy used and which version of Exchange you were backing up. Before I can restore Exchange, the storage groups and databases must already exist on the destination server. I have to have a parking lot in which to park the car. Doesn't have to have any data in it, but the storage group or the database must just have a name and exist. And then when you do the restore, Backup Exec will populate that with the data from your backup. The destination server must have the same organization and administrative group name as the source. And I must configure the destination databases so that they can be overwritten by the restore. When you are recovering the information store, you can use a recovery storage group or recovery database if you want to recover from an older copy. Exchange allows you to restore from snapshots, so it allows you to revert the database to a snapshot. I can restore individual items, mailboxes, or email using granular recovery technology. Individual email will be restored to a PST file, which must be attached to Outlook. And I can restore Exchange data to a server other than the one it was backed up from, provided Exchange is installed on that new destination. You must allow the databases to be overwritten. This is an Exchange function. You must go into the properties of the mailbox. If it's Exchange 2003 or 2007, right-click the database and go to Properties and allow the database to be overwritten by a restore. If I'm running Exchange 2010, it's a very similar screen that I would right-click on the database, go to Maintenance, go to Properties, and allow it to be overwritten. For Exchange 2003 and Exchange 2007, using a recovery storage group, or Exchange 2010 using a recovery database, these Exchange 2003 cannot be restored from a snapshot. You do not want to mount the mailbox stores before the restore. So everything is dismounted, you do the restore, and then you can mount the mailboxes. On the server that hosts the recovery storage group, there must be a storage group with the same name as the original storage group. If you need help with this, there's a tech note, How To 73801, that will help you configure Exchange to use this recovery storage group. This is the old method of doing granular recovery. So before Backup Exec supported granular recovery, I could create a recovery storage group, restore the mail, and then using Exchange, recover the bits and pieces. With Backup Exec, you no longer need to do that step. You can do all of the recovery of the bits and pieces directly from Backup Exec. I can also redirect Exchange data. So in order to redirect, the storage groups and database must already exist. They can be blank. They just have to have the same name. The destination server must have the same organization and administrative group name, and the databases must be configured so they can be overwritten. We've taken a look at how to do that. I cannot redirect to different versions of Exchange. So I cannot redirect from 2007 to 2010. I can also not redirect the site replication service. I can redirect Exchange mailbox items. So the mailbox or the public folder must exist in the location where I'm going. I must have Outlook installed on the destination server where I want to restore the PST file, and a login account must have rights to that destination mailbox. So to do a full Exchange database restore, we're going to say that we want to restore Microsoft Exchange and that we're going to restore a database or storage group. You can select from which backup you wish to do the restore, so you can select the point in time that you wish to restore. Normally it will be the most recent. You then say, do you want to restore it to the original location or do you wish to redirect? Do you want to restore all the transaction logs or do you want to purge existing transaction logs and restore only the database? Where do I want to temporarily store log and patch files? The default location is C:\temp. It is a best practice not to store this data on the C drive. Find another directory on a volume besides C in which to temporarily store log and patch files. Do you wish to bring Exchange online after the restore completes? If you have more backups to restore, the answer is no. If I wish to do a granular restore, this is if I want to bring back just pieces and parts, I select Exchange Mailbox Items. This will allow you to drill down within the database and select specific mailboxes or emails that you wish to restore. So you'll see tremendous detail if you drill down inside this backup, and you can select any single item or group of items that you wish to restore. Where do you want the restore to go? If you choose to go to a different location, that mailbox must exist in the other location. And do I want to overwrite existing, or do I want to recreate? When you redirect to a PST, restores can be redirected to a media server itself, the backup exec server, or any remote server. Outlook needs to be there so that you can attach to the PST, and you must specify a local path on the target server. The file naming convention is that it will be a PST with the file names matching the mailbox from which the backup was originally taken. If you have file name collisions, it will add a 1 or a 2, a counter to those names. The PST file size is limited to 20 gigs. If the restore exceeds 20 gigs, it will create multiple PST files that all are within that 20 gig limit. To redirect a restore to a PST, I have to select the individual items that will be redirected, and then I specify the location and the account that has rights to write to that location. You can select that you wish to restore to mailboxes, to public folders. In our case, we're going to restore specifically to a PST. To perform a disaster recovery for Exchange, the easiest method is to have done a simplified disaster recovery qualified backup and then do an SDR recovery of that server. I have to recover Windows first. I have to have Windows up and running, make sure that Exchange is installed and the services are running, and start the backup exec agent. If needed, I can catalog the backup exec sets, the backup sets that are needed to recover. If this was just the Exchange server that went down, those should already be recovered. Then you can run the restore wizard and select all the storage groups that you wish to recover, and now I can do a full backup of those restored databases. How to 73806 walks you through all of the steps for this recovery. For most people, Exchange is an absolutely work-critical application. We communicate so much through email. If this server has gone down, your Exchange server has gone down, and your users are not able to access Outlook, this is probably the most stressful recovery you as an administrator will ever do. I encourage you to access this how-to article, print it out, and save it in a place where you keep your disaster recovery information. Because looking up this article and walking through the steps will help reduce your stress levels and help you bring this server back much more quickly. So this is a great article to have handy. So in this lesson, we have talked about the basic components of Exchange, the capabilities of the agent for Microsoft Exchange Server. We've talked about the requirements for backing up Exchange. We've learned how Backup Exec 2012 supports Exchange 2010 and the process to backup and restore Exchange data and how to create your backup and restore workflows for Exchange. And then we've talked about the different restore options that are available for Microsoft Exchange.